Well, I'm Jeffrey Jacoby, and I have a story for all ages. Today's story is called The Solstice Badger by Robin McFadden. If you've never seen a badger before, this is what he looks like.
Ooh, it's kind of cute.
Kind of cute. So back in the beginning of time, it was always summer. The world was filled with the very first creatures, and they loved the everlasting summer sunshine. The sun walked without hurry and joy across the sky every day, until there came a day when the sun's head grew a little heavy. His light was weaker, and all the first creatures wondered and worried. Apparently, the sun was lonely, and he needed a friend. All the first creatures tried to befriend the sun, but once they all got close to him, they got burned. This made the sun even sadder, so he got even more sad. But far down under the earth, there's a river, and it runs from horizon to horizon. And both the sun and the moon rest in its waters whenever they aren't up in the sky. Near this underground river, way below the earth's surface, there lived the very first badger. His tunnels went everywhere, and he loved the bright jewels he found in the darkness. His home was a giant geode with walls that glittered and sparkled. In his solitude, he was pretty content, but he was a little lonely too. One night, Badger heard crying, and he followed the sound down his tunnels to the bank of that underground river. There was the sun. "What's wrong?" Badger asked gently. The sun was startled and jumped to his feet. "A new creature! I've never seen anything like you before. But you should run away before I burn you." Badger shook his head and said, "I have collected gems in the white-hot center of the world. You're not going to burn me. Come to my house and have tea." So they talked, and they found they had a lot to say to each other, each having been living in solitude. That next day when the sun rose, his light was clear and bright, and all the creatures of the earth knew that the sun had found a friend, and they were all very happy for him.
Yay.
That night, the sun hurried back to the badger's house so they could continue their talks and their stories. They enjoyed talking so much that the sun left later each time they got together. Things went on like this for a while, and the sun was starting later every day and setting earlier and earlier so he could return to his good friend, and he didn't notice the world was changing. Leaves were falling, the winds were getting bitter, and the very first snow began to fall. The trees were fine, but the creatures of the world were miserable in the cold. One evening, when Sun arrived at Badger's house, his friend said, "Come with me, Sun." And they went to the shallow tunnels near the earth's surface, and he said, "Listen." The Sun listened, and he heard the howling wind and these creaking branches and the sounds of shivering and sneezing and no bird song and no scampering feet. "You must have spent too much time with me, Sun. The world misses you." The Sun was filled with remorse for what he had done for neglecting his duties to the world, and he would have rushed up to the sky and stayed there to make up all the lost time. But his prudent badger friend stopped him. "Hasty repairs make weak burrows," the badger said. "We must act wisely to fix this." So the Sun thought and said, "The trees are the oldest things on earth, and Pine is the eldest. I think she'll know what to do, but she may be angry with me." So Badger packed a sack with all of his most precious, glorious gems he'd collected and enough food for a feast. "Wait for me here," he told the Sun, and for the first time ever, torch in paw, he tunneled all the way to the surface of the earth. Pine stood in a glade in the forest, and Badger broke through that surface and stood before her, and she greeted him calmly. "Hello, small animal who befriends the sun." Her deep voice made the ground quiver. "Welcome." Oh, I guess I made that quiver. He bowed to her and said, "My friend Sun wishes to fix the harm he's caused. If he went back to his old ways," yeah, it was like that, would the world be healed?" "If he brought back the warmth tomorrow," Pine said, "the world would drown in snow melt and all the world would be chaos." Badger replied, "Well, wise one, I have gifts for you. Will you accept them with our apologies and tell me what advice to give my only friend?" He showed her the jewels and the food, and she looked thoughtful. "A generous gift," she said, "and one I have no use for. Give them to the creatures who have suffered more than I. As for a solution, the Sun must regain his old habits as gradually as he lost them. All good things in this world happen slowly, seeds and eggs and seasons alike." You will miss him, she said, but to make things right, he must go back, and it must be this way. He nodded, and tears filled his eyes. But don't despair, brave Badger, Pine said, in a voice so resonant it seemed to come from everywhere at once. My roots are on great Mother Earth's pulse, and she speaks now through me. When 7 cycles of the moon have passed, the days will be as long as ever, but then your visits can grow again. After 13 moons, the pattern will begin anew, for the sun must have a companion, and the badger must be rewarded for his selflessness. And the Great Mother has decided to welcome these dark times and call them winter. All of the things held their breath in a moment of great awe. Badger joyfully cried, "So let it be. On this night every year I will tunnel to the surface to give gifts to all small beasts, gifts of thanks, blessing, and love." He held his torch high up in the air and said, "This will be a token of the sun's return. Please, Pine, take it and call them." Pine bent down and took the torch. When she straightened back up, it glowed like a big star in her topmost branches. Far and near, creatures saw the light and went toward it. They saw in the tree, then, all of the beautiful gems Badger had collected and had lovingly placed in her branches. They shimmered and sent colorful light out into the cold winter darkness. And then on the ground, but around the tree, was spread a huge banquet, enough for all those poor little creatures that had been suffering. Badger returned to the sun to tell him the good news. And the next morning, the day began a little earlier. And every day since then, the sun travels across the sky watching everything that we do. So he has stories to tell Badger. And their visits grow longer every night for half a year. At the darkest part of winter, we still honor wise old Pine by hanging jewels and lights in her branches. And on the longest night, Badger still tunnels to the surface, bearing gifts to all small creatures who patiently bear the cold and darkness, knowing that even winter will forever be joyful as long as the solstice badger keeps his promise, and he always will.
Yay.